Hello and welcome to our session on bills of material. In this session I'm going to talk a little bit about what bills of material are and how we can use them within Oracle. As you can see, I've already opened up my Oracle session and I have my menu open to my bills of material menu. A little bit about bills of material. Bills of material, if you're not familiar with them, are basically containers of components. So when you think of a bill of material, think of an assembly. For instance, if we think of a car, what is a car made of? Well, it's an engine, it's wheels, it's a chassis, it's windshields, seats. All the things that make up a car are basically described as components. The completed assembly is described as a bill of material. So let's get started. Let's go into our bills of material form and let's query up a bill of material. I already have one in my clipboard, so I'm going to paste that in, hit the find button, and a couple of things open. I still have my find screen open. I have this bills of material screen and I have a bill summary. So if I was searching for more than one bill of material, I would see that information here. Most of the time we don't use the summary form much, so we can minimize that. And let's concentrate on our bills of material screen. First off, we see our assembly item up at the top here in this header field. We see the description, we see the revision, we see the date it was released, and then down below we see the different components that make up this particular bill of material. In this case, we have our components in rows along with their description and other information, quantity and such. We see date effectivities, when the effective date of this component was entered into the system. We see any engineering change orders that may have impacted this bill within the past. We have some component details. We can see that this component is a subassembly versus this component, which is a purchased item. We have a material control field. This has an impact to the discrete jobs and how they are processed. For instance, this is a pull item, an operation pull item. What that means is that it would be backflushed or transacted at the time this component was pulled into an operation. And the particular operation would be operation 50. We would see that on a routing. A lot of people tend to create the bill of material first before the routing. It's actually a better idea to create the routing first, because then you can assign your components to the corresponding operation within the routing. And I'll talk a little bit about routings in another session. We also have an order management tab if there's any ATP items or any quantities regarding order management. I don't see this used much except in ATO configurations, and ATO configurations is an assemble to order configuration. ATP is available to promise. Alright, so let's go back to our main tab, and I want to talk a little bit about some of these other buttons down below. Every item or bill of material has a revision. Revision field is very much like the item revision field. You can create new revisions here with new effectivity dates. In the bill details, we can have a longer description and we can set up common bills. A little bit about common bills. A lot of people think if I need a bill of material that's very much like another bill of material, I have two very, very like assemblies, that they would just copy the bill of material from one to the other. And that's fine. If you need to do that and make component changes within the new bill, that's a good way to do it. However, I've found that there are a lot of companies that have component configurations that are exactly alike from different items, and you see that in companies where they make products that are exactly the same, but they may have different compliance regulations, they may have different testing requirements, and so once you get to an assembly, a finished assembly, and then it's about to go into compliance testing or such, then you could send that into that testing via routing and convert that item to a new part number. But those part numbers could be common bills. So a common bill is basically a series of assemblies that have identical component configurations. Something to think about when you're building bills of material. You'll also notice when you're in the component field, you have this designator button that lights up. If I click on that, I can see this form. What a reference designator is if you have numbers of components. I see this often used in the electronics industry, where they'll have a particular circuit board that may have several capacitors on it, and those capacitors go into different areas of the circuit board. So you need to manage them by reference designators. So for instance, you might put in C1 for the C1 position on the motherboard, and then C2 for the next position. And basically this just gives you the different reference designators. Your description could actually relate to its position, so that if it was, say, a large circuit board, an engineer could find where the C1 position is. So anyway, that's a little bit of detail about reference designators. Again, I don't see them used in general industry much, but they are a very useful tool in electronics. The other thing that you need to know about this particular component page is you can also set up substitutes. So for instance, if I have a part number here and I've got a substitute for it, I can designate that here. So for instance, let's try to pick something that makes sense. Well, I can't see. Alright, let's just pick paint. Alright, so this now is a substitute component for this component. And what that means is if someone were building this assembly, it would allow them to use either or component. Now, where is this particularly useful? Well, if you're in a factory that the engineers have said that they allow substitutes on certain components, you don't want to have to go get a deviation record every time you use a substitute. So this allows the engineers to develop a substitute component that stays within the bill of material record, so that if you're on the factory floor and you find out that you need a substitute, you can just go to the substitute area and select it and just use that in your bill of material, as opposed to the standard component. Saves a lot of time, basically. Now, the other aspect of this is you need to understand that planning only plans to the main component, the standard component. It doesn't plan to any substitutes. So if you have substitutes that you need planned, you might want to set them up on like min-max planning or reorder point planning. Actually, not reorder point planning. I would set them up on min-max because there's not ever going to be demand for the substitute unless it's used as a standard in another bill of material. Okay, so that covers the basics of our bill of material here. Now we can go on to look at what we can do with other bills of materials. Let's look at an indented bill. An indented bill of material is basically a view into the different levels of a bill of material. As you recall, I said a bill of material can be assembly, such as a car, and within that car you can have a component called an engine. Well, of course, within that engine you're going to have even more components. You'll have a head and a valve and pistons and such. And basically this indented bill of material view lets us look down into that bill structure. So we're going to choose this item, and we're going to go down, if we need to, we can go down 10 levels and look at this indented bill of material. Alright, now within this form you'll notice we have a level column, and then we have pluses in front of some of our items. Those pluses indicate that there are further levels down below that structure, and if I wanted to see those, I can hit the plus sign here and it will break those down. So now I see we have a manual, and then we have different manuals that make up that manual set. So these are components to this bill of material. If I were to capture that assembly and do a query on it, I would see that it has 3 components within it. It's usually designated as a subassembly, and the components can be purchased items or make items. In some cases, usually if they're make items, that tends to indicate that there are components within them, and they are subassemblies as well. Now let's see if this warranty, and if we go down more than 2 levels, let's have a look at this one. Now that doesn't go down more than 2 levels. And the chassis itself, here we go. We've got a level 1 chassis, and within that is a component called a drive mount assembly, and within that assembly we have a drive mount top, and within that assembly we have plastic stock and resin. So it all goes down to typically a purchased item, which is something you would bring into your factory and build your assemblies with. So here we see a very somewhat complex structure that takes us down through 4 levels of a bill. Now there's a few other things that you can see here as well. You can of course see the bill details, the item sequence, the operation sequence, and of course this would indicate the operation of the routing that that particular item is used in. We also have the quantities field, where we can see the quantity requirements, planning and yield, and extended quantity if there were other quantities. And here you see that this particular one has a quantity of 0.1. So its unit of measure is not an each, it's pounds. So a 0.1 pound requirement for that particular component in this assembly. So there's the indented bills. Those are very useful. A lot of these other tabs are pretty much the same that you would see in the bill details, so I'm not going to cover those. But you just need to understand that the indented bill is a way of searching down through the bill structure. The other thing that we can do is a comparison of bills. For instance, earlier when I said that you can do a bill copy, you might want to be able to do a comparison between two bills and make sure that the componentry is the same or slightly different based on your requirements. So a very useful tool is the bill comparison form. So if I bring that up and I put in an item, and then I come over and I select another assembly, and let's try to select something close to that. Let's see. This is a digital camera. There's probably not going to be very much the same between those two, but that's okay. We want to compare quantities, operation sequence, implemented. We could compare our item sequence and disable dates and other things, but typically these are the defaults that you would find, and you could look up differences only, or you could do a complete comparison. Because these two are very different from each other, either way is going to look just about as messy. But if you knew you had two bills of material that were very, very close to each other and had a lot of componentry in them, you may want to look at differences only. And I'll show you both of those in just a second here. Alright, so this is how we interpret this. It says that for this item, it shows up in our second bill of material, but not, or shows up in our first bill of material, but not in our second bill of material. So every one of these items are components that are within bill 1, but not within bill 2. And the reverse is down below. We have components that are in bill 2, but not in bill 1. And if you go to the description, you can kind of see that here, because we have our desktop body casting. This is a camera, of course, so that would have to be, oh, I told you wrong. It's actually the reverse of that. If it's checked, it's within bill 2. If it's not checked, it's within bill 1. So anyway, this is the problem you have when you compare very, very dissimilar items. It's hard to interpret this information. If I were to go back and look at differences only, we still see almost virtually the same information, because there's nothing the same on either one of these bills of material. So if you're going to do this and you're find it useful, you need to select bills that are reasonably close to each other. An item where used is a very useful form. Basically, it will show you all the bills of material that a component is used. So for instance, if I were to go back to my bills form and I want to look up a component, the form opens and put in my assembly, and I want to see all the assemblies that this particular component is used in. And I do the search here. It's going out and it's parsing through all of those. Oh dear. Let's try another component. This may be a problem. There we go. Okay. So this is showing me that this wireless mouse is used in all of these different assemblies. If it was used in an assembly that needed a breakdown, then I could see it here. But it's used at the first level in all of these assemblies. So that's, again, a very useful tool, the item where used. Basically shows you all the bills of material that a component is assigned to. Close all these forms down, get back to where we started. The next thing that I can show you here is what's called a mass change. For instance, if you need to make changes, say to more than one bill of material at a time, rather than going into the bill of material itself and making the change, you can come here and make changes across all the bills of material. So, or all the bills of material that are relative to the change you wish to make. Basically, I just hit the tab key here, and it assigned me the next available mass change number. Now I can select a type of change, and let's just say we're doing a document change. That may not be relative, but I'll look in, I'll just use it for now. I could choose to use a category set, or I could choose a range of items. Basically, what this allows me to do is select all the items that I wish to make the change to. I find that the categories are quite useful for this. Quite often you can't find a range of item that suits you because your part number structures are never quite that tidy. So what I can do here is I can create this mass change, and once I save it, then I can do a report or implement on it. So once I've done this page, then I can come into my changes field, and then I can choose the action that I wish to take. So for instance, if I was making a component obsolete and creating or adding and substituting it with a new component over all the bills of materials, what I would do would be to disable a component and then add a new component. I wouldn't use the update because you can't update an item from one item to another. You have to use a disable and then an add. So for instance, I could disable an existing component. Let's see. Find a component that I can disable. Let's say we're going to disable our blue paint, and then we're going to add our white paint. So basically it would take all the assemblies that we're using this component and convert them to this component. If I wanted to change component details, I could do so here. If I wanted to change the control of a component, I could do so here. So that's the change that I wish to make. So now I can save this change. Okay, and then come back to my main screen, and I could report that change and submit it. I could also implement it as well. The good thing about doing a report prior to an implementation is that you can see all the bills of materials that would be affected by the change and assess the impact prior to doing the actual implementation. And if I were to submit this, it sends off a request, and that request is processed. Now, in this particular instance, I don't know if the manager is running, so I'm just going to go check and see if that's running. Okay, so it looks like the manager is running, and that report is going to process. It may take a few minutes, so I'm going to come back to it later. In the meantime, I'll just minimize it and keep it down here where I can keep track of things. One of the other things that you can do with bills of materials is you can establish attachments. Or basically, attachments to a bill of material would be things like, say you wanted to attach a file, say a PDF file that contains build instructions or contains testing instructions. You could do so with bill attachments. You can find that under the Documents menu here. So I can create a bill attachment, and let's just say I want to do, like I said, we could attach a file. I'm just going to do a short text right now, and basically this comes down, I come down to my short text, and I'm going to put in some information. I can type anything I want here, and then I can save that as a document for bill attachments. So I want to save this particular bill attachment. Alright, now I've got a title for it. So how would I go about using this attachment that I've saved? So let's go back to our bills, and let's look up a bill of material. Alright, so let's grab the camera here, find it. There's a substitute or an alternate bill. I'll talk about that a little later in an advanced class. So here's my bill of material. Here's my attachment over here. So if I come up to my paper clip, I can, if I wanted to create an attachment on the fly that's unique to this bill of material, I could do so here, but I want to use my document catalog. So let's open up my document catalog, and let's see if we can find the title. There we are. And we'll do a find on that. Let's just see if it can understand partials. No, it didn't, because it said the query did not find a record. So let's try and see if we can find that. Ah, there we are. There's our short text. Okay, so I could do an attachment. There it is. There's the information that I typed. So that's how you could attach something to a bill of material. Now, if I wanted to create a file attachment, I could go in and select whatever category I wanted to do. Let's just stick with bill attachments. And in this case, let's see, give it a name. And we need to select file. And when we do that, it opens up this form where I can browse to a file that is on either my client computer or on my network. Let's just go into my libraries here and find a document. And, let's say I've got a very large file that I could attach here. And then if I were to submit that, it would send that file to the server, and it would download that file into a bit image of whatever it was, whatever file extension that was. In this case, that was an MP4. It's a very large one, so I'm going to cancel that. I'm not going to do that. But if that were working, it would come back and it would say, has the file been updated successfully? You would say yes, and then you could save that attachment and then come back later, click open a document, and what that would do is bring in that native file into its bring in that file into its native application and run that particular file. Let me go through that again, because there was a lot in a very short amount of time. Let's clear this, come back to our bill details, and I'm going to put in file again. In this case, I'm going to browse to something that isn't so large. Okay, there's a document. Let's try that one. And we're going to submit that. And that should have worked. So I can go back to yes, save it, close this, save my bill of material, and close it out and come back in so that you can see something here. It should work. So I do my find, put in my item, there's my bill, open it. You'll notice that it shows that there are valid attachments, because now I have a sticky note in my paper clip, or I have a yellow note paper in my paper clip. So if I click on attachments, looks like my file attachment may not have worked. Now my text attachment did work fine, but this may not open anything. We'll see. Open it, and if everything worked, then there we go. It opened up the document that I had attached to that particular bill of material. So you can see that bill attachments can be very useful. That attachment feature that I just showed you here also works on items and just about, well, not any record in Oracle, but several of the records, such as sales orders and purchase orders. Okay, let's see where this has gotten us. Okay, so we covered our attachments, we talked about common bills, mass changes. Alright, we've done most of everything with our bill of material. Now we did have this report running, and looks like it completed with an error, so I may not be able to show you that report. So if I do a view output, yeah, zero output, so I can't show you the mass change bill report. Maybe I can pick that up on a separate training class and get that to work for you. Alright, so let's see if I've covered everything that I wanted to cover. I believe that's it. My next session, I'm going to cover routings, and I'll talk about departments and resources, how would we create those routings, and how those are used in unison with the bill of material. Alright, so thank you very much for your time. I know that was a lot to take in, but the great thing about these videos is you can always replay them and kind of follow along. Be sure and leave a comment. Let me know what you like, what you didn't like, and I'll try to adjust for any future videos. Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you soon.